British speaker.
Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be that. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi, Namukwa, Osinachi. One lemon, Osinachi, I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi, Mama, Osinachi.
Okay, see you later. Hi, Rhonda.
Okay, Shola, hello, how are you?
I'm good.
Yeah, we had the event, so Shola, I was going to ask you if there's a way, if the chat is functioning. I guess I can find out.
Yeah, it's functioning because I went to a panel before this one. And
okay.
They were using chat.
Can I send you the bios for you to post in the chat?
Okay, I can copy and paste what you sent before.
Yes, I got my other Shola. Hello, Mr. Oloro Nyumi. Yes,
I'm here, Mom.
Yes. Yeah. He made a couple changes, so I'm going to send you, and I'm going to resend you the. Actually, you have a link to the Google Doc, right? So this changes should show up.
Yeah, I can see you right now.
Yeah.
I can see you right now, Mom. Yeah.
But Shola, Adineka,
yes.
you have the change. You have the document that you must have the updated version because I sent you a link, right? Or no, I sent it in an email. Let me send it to you in a link.
Okay, send it to me in an email and I'll copy and paste in chat now, please.
Okay. Okay.
Box too.
Yeah,
Hi, Rhonda.
nice to see you.
Yeah, it's great to see you. Thank you for coming.
Sure.
Oga Shola Mukin, so.
Hi, Carson. Congratulations. So, are you now associate?
Yes, James. Didn't you get your tenure? You told me you got your tenure?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so excited. You guys have high hopes for me. It's still a long...
So then that's a mistake then. Why did I think you said that your papers were in?
Well, they should be here next year.
Oh, then I'm promoting you before your time. You might change that.
Like we say in Nigeria, I claim it.
All right. Long as it's been. I think you met before, but every time I see you, it's like, oh,
you Americans have a funny system. You have to wait for a certain period, even though if you qualify for it, you still have to wait. That is ridiculous. Once you qualify, you should just be able to put in your paper and then get on. Is it not 3 years, minimum of 3 years? You've done 3 years with them already.
Yeah, well, it will be free by August.
Oh,
but I find the waiting period to be quite, generative in its own way also. It allows you to learn the ropes of the trade. And I don't know, there's something about waiting that is sometimes maybe.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. In Europe, it's a different ball game. I know in Europe, somewhere else, you're qualified to go up, but
you put in your papers, yeah.
Yeah, turn by turn. I mean, local is not.
it's not the ideology.
Yeah.
So maybe I should just make sure that everybody knows everybody. Corbina, hi, all my pals, and hi, Dotun.
Hi.
Let me. Do you know all know each other?
Yeah, we do. I mean, we can introduce ourselves.
Yes. And I've asked Shola to post the bios in the chat so that I don't have to them, and that's going to save us a little bit of time because they have us on this very tight schedule.
Oh, I've got them. I'm going to paste and copy in the chat now.
Yeah, and so let's start with I'll start. I'm Rhonda Cobham-Sand. I teach at Amherst College, and these guys are very kind to call me a digital scholar, but mostly I'm happy to be hanging out with them. And really honored to be leading this session. Let's ask James to introduce himself first. Yeah, James, you want to just say a couple words to the?
Yeah, just to welcome everyone. My name is James Yeku, and I'm excited to be here. Honored, as a matter of fact, to have some of the scholars I have read and looked up to over the years come together to celebrate my work. It's the greatest honor anyone could do me. So thank you all for coming, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts on the book.
Yeah, I see, unfortunately, we are 2 minutes to time, and they've got us on such a tight schedule. So I may have to ask the rest of you to wait, but do take a minute, just to say who you are when you get up. Our names on the screens. And I think what I'll do, I think I said 8 minutes is what we can do. And Shola, I don't know what you want to do. They haven't put a spot for you on the program, but I was hoping that you would share the introductions with me. Is that something you want to do?
I mean,
you don't have to.
I was going to defer to you.
Oh, it's fine, but I just need to know what's going on.
And then because of time, of the issue of timing, so I don't have to say much. I'm very happy being in the background, and I've tried. I just tried to copy and paste in chat, and it's not allowing me to do it.
Okay. Somebody's asking
so we
me
can
for
do without that.
sure.
That shouldn't be a matter. I've tried, and it's not working.
Yeah. Yes. The organizers are trying to say something to us.
Okay, I'll put one.
Yeah, and you don't have to put them. You can just put them up like that. You just put them up when the person speaks. That's probably okay.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Hi. Good afternoon.
Yes, please. Can we all come on video? Shola, Lauren, your me is not showing on video. I need to take a screenshot of our screen now. So can we all go on video? I want to take a picture right now. Shola, Lauren, your me, can you hear me?
He was just there. Yep. Yep. There he is.
Thank you.
I can hear you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to do that for about 2 seconds, and you can continue the conversation. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm done. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you.
Should we start our panel now?
Yes, please. You can start your panel now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much. We're in, welcome to this session on a very important new book. I'm Rhonda Cobham-Sand at Amherst College. And we're here today to talk about Professor James Yeku's new book, Cultural Netizenship, which, as you can see, is one of the best covers I've seen for a really long time. It's a book about social media, popular culture, and performance in Nigeria. And it's one of the first books that I've read that really takes that, takes social media as the thing that it's looking at. So there are chapters in the book on scam baiting, on Nollywood memes, on selfies, on humor, on resistance, and on virality and Instagram comedy in a state of pandemic. The term cultural netizenship is particularly interesting, and I'm sure that the panelists will have something to say about it. James, I want to congratulate you on a fabulously written book. I am enthralled, and we're going to go in the, we're going to have people speak in the order that they appear on the program, which means that, and then at the end of those speeches, which will be, those presentations will be about 8 minutes each, I'm going to ask Professor Yeku to respond, and you'll see the bios of the person who's speaking in the chat. So let's go ahead with that. And our first presenter is Dotun Ayobade. Dotun, if you just go ahead. Thank you.
So thank you for the introduction, Rhonda, and to Shola for organizing the panel. It's my pleasure to speak on this book, to be invited to speak on this book. It's a singular honor because James is a scholar whose work I admire on several levels, and he's just a great human. And it's just befitting that he would write a book whose cover is this gorgeous. So I will offer some comments in 8 minutes, and I'll try to do a little more than just say how wonderful a book is, how happy I am for you to get this book out in the world, and just how wonderful the book is. So I'm going to try to get as much as I can within 8 minutes. So at a time when social media confronts increased scrutiny and calls for regulation in the global north, Cultural Netizenship argues that its platforms have acted as amplifiers of the voice and perspectives of everyday Nigerians who have been denied access to mainstream media and traditional avenues for civic engagement. Nigerians' deployment of subversive humor through a plethora of digital acts, such as remixing cultural texts, comedic skits, memes, selfies, GIFs, and the like, offer tools for tackling the many failings of the state. The array and ubiquity of social media platforms in the cultural and political life of Nigerians requires nimble, rigorous, and sustained analysis. Yeku has offered us a careful and thoughtful engagement with what Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok have come to mean for Nigerian popular culture and for the contested terms of Nigerian citizenship. Cultural netizenship is interdisciplinary in its scope, covering popular cultural studies, performance studies, media studies, and some Black studies in there, to venture a reading of Nigerian political economy in the era of social media. So cultural netizenship might be read as an important addition to the growing body of works that take popular culture as sites of youth creativity and resourcefulness to be found in the margins of political power. Yeku's book equally contributes to the growing area of African digital humanities, especially in his attention to the emergent forms of speech authorized by new media forms. He confirms with this book his place as a leading voice in African digital humanities. And I'll say two things I find particularly compelling in the way the book is framed. I find compelling his argument that social media, his argument of social media as disruptive of mainstream state-controlled media platforms, such as the Nigerian Television Authority, radio, and a host of private media under state regulation, and thus susceptible to state coercion. He also makes the case that while social media might subvert the hegemony of these established networks of control, it also fosters new celebrity cultures just as susceptible to state co-optation. And that's a nuance that I really appreciated in Yeku's articulation. I'm also compelled by the argument that legitimate critics of social media as sites of algorithmic violence need not foreclose an appreciation of their transformative potential in the context of severe political repression in places such as Nigeria. So those are two kind of big, nuanced arguments that I really appreciate Yeku makes in the book. And I do have notes for each chapter, but I'll try to read my notes on chapter 1 and then transition to just my reflection on how Yeku makes the arguments. So chapter 1 is a bifurcated chapter, the first part of which offers an audacious and insightful complication of a dominant understanding of Afropolitanism as an elitist celebration of African mobility. Yeku argues that the figure of the 419 scammer exploits digital mobility to present themselves as an iteration of the Afropolitan that is global, but also local. The 419 scammer, according to Yeku, is an Afropolitan anti-hero, which is, quote, the inverse of the supposedly culturally savvy, educated global African, end quote. The second half of the chapter, as incisive as the first, explores the racialized, gendered, and sexual underpinnings of online scam baiting websites, such as 419 Ether. And if you don't know what scam baiting websites are, which I didn't know exist prior to reading this chapter, these are sites that are designed essentially to lure 419, ostensible 419 scammers to taking photographs of themselves, and then these photographs are then collated and displayed on this website pretty much as a way of photographically capturing an ostensible online crime. Yeku reads the photographic capture of scammers that are usually Nigerian or framed as Nigerian as vigilante sites that authorize racist constructions of the Black and African other. The practice of scam baiting is framed on those sites as a just reversal of the power dynamic in the online scam world, so that these websites lure ostensible scammers to send sometimes sexually suggestive photographs of themselves. You would see men being asked to pose in feminine dresses, which are then circulated on these websites. In a powerful read of the dynamic at play, Yeku turns the lens not on scammers, but on the mostly white men who derive pleasure from fetishizing the eroticized male body. This argument tracked nicely with Eric Lott's classic essay, Love and Thefts, the racial unconscious of blackface minstrelsy, in which Lott argues, describes a strong white fascination with Black men and Black male culture that suffuses minstrelsy shows with an aura of illicit sex and thinly veiled homoerotic desire. So this is a really lively chapter in the book, and one of its most forthright. This quality of liveliness is also what makes it a standout chapter in the overall narrative of the book, pretty much like a blue note in a jazz sequence. So it really stands out within the arc of the book. The question of how this blue note fits into the overall theme of cultural netizenship could be more carefully teased out, especially as Yeku appears to suppress the agency and inventiveness of the 419 scammer in favor of the just as urgent critique of the morally dubious vigilantism of scam baiters. As I read through this chapter, I considered the model that Tina Campt offers us in listening to images, which is a model for sensing the alternative frequencies of a photograph, and particularly a photograph designed to capture and criminalize Blackness. And another reason why this chapter stands out is that the post-colonial state, which is the core subject in the introduction, appears to take a backseat. And as a matter of fact, the state doesn't figure as actively as the object of cultural netizenship or of critique until time is up. Okay, that happened quickly. I'll just skip all the way down to my questions. Okay. The hallmark of a good book lies in the quality of answers it provides, but it's also true that a book can be judged by the quality of questions it provokes. It's in the spirit of the latter that I offer some salient questions that cultural netizenship has provoked for me. So there's a clear investment in the resistive and political subversive uses of social media. And I am also wondering about digital vulnerability. And this is a question for Professor Yeku. How the move to online speech also brings the Nigerian subject out of anonymity, the anonymity of everyday life, and into closer contact with the state. The question also operates on the assumption that the terms of engagement between the citizen and the state is one of distance and disdain. So my thinking is that by coming on social media and making the self legible on social media in the ways that you argue, that there is also the risk of surveillance and vulnerability, right? So the subject then emerges from the shadows from the margins into the center, and that could be double-edged. And I wonder what your thoughts on that is. And a related question is on the conceptual uses of cultural netizenship as a practice. And I wonder about the other uses of social media that lie in excess of an explicit political engagement with the state. And I wanted to consider such acts, such everyday uses such as slut shaming, cyberbullying, body shaming, cyber stalking, gaslighting, that all characterize social media use. And how does this frame in your formation or formulation and thinking about cultural netizenship? And the final question, which is really an indulgent one, is to reflect with us what it means and what it's kind of the logistics and ethics of writing about social media. And there are two parts to this question. The first part is kind of the rate of refresh of social media content versus the rhythms of book writing. So it's news cycling in and out at the speed of light on social media, and book writing has its own slow rhythm. It takes time, right? And so what does that mean? What does it mean to write about a media form that's notorious and fickle for refreshing itself? That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Congrats for getting to the end of that, and congrats again to James. We're now moving to our next presenter, who is Dina Ligaga.
All right.
Dina's, yeah, I'll give you a 1 minute warning and then a time's up warning. But Dina's bio is at the top of your chat screen if you want to check it out there.
Oh, perfect. Thank you, Rhonda, for introducing me and for chairing this session. And thank you to the panel organizer, Professor Shola Adenikan. Thank you for inviting me, and congratulations to you, James. Now, I'll just jump right into it. This book for me congregates a few important ideas that signal relevant and contemporary debates of the digital, the popular, and the performative. While these categories remain slippery, it's their very fluidity that marks for me the avenue through which I imagine Yeku enters into this discussion. I found the idea of cultural netizenship quite useful in signaling ways in which various modes of expression came together to engage the idea of a problematic and corrupt, if not failing, state. In a context where ordinary voices are often rendered invisible, cultural netizenship is used to revoice and visibilize both content and marginal voices. This process shatters the opacity of the post-colonial state, which is shrouded in mystery and which manages to evade accountability often. So cultural netizenship brings out the marginal voices in this way. So in many ways, then, Yeku throws at us a lot of very provocative and informative concepts to think with. As a popular culture scholar, I was immediately drawn to the work that popular culture does, that of disrupting and of producing dissidents. The digital space for me has therefore always been about extensions of spaces for performing dissidents. In this way, I see Yeku locating his work in that important terrain where he urges us to take seriously forms that circulate as non-serious, okay? Following bodies of work of other interrogators in the digital space that critique regimes of power, Yeku adds to this stock of work by providing a book-length engagement with the meanings of popular culture texts online. So I was drawn to many angles in the book. For instance, I like the idea of the formation of networks of popular subjectivities as a driving force behind cultural netizenship, a form of public that congregates around a cause in order to make the cause mean something. Digitally, this is often in the form of a viral text. Secondly, I was invested in tracking how agency emerges as an important theme in reading the online performances, whether through representational refusals or intentional selfies. The idea of the public spectacle turned around in meaning, where the gazed upon refuses to feel shamed, is an aspect of exploring agency that remains absolutely interesting to me. Yeku's work encourages us to look beyond the obvious. So where online activism is often dismissed as slacktivism, Yeku argues that this point of view forecloses genuine possibility for imagining other avenues for agitation, for change. The book provides a myriad of definitions that offer the reader many takeaway nuggets with which to navigate the cultural terrain of the digital. While the introduction provides us with a solid foundational entry into the book, it is the subsequent chapters that really amp up the debate for me. I found the chapter on Afropolitan anti-heroes particularly captivating for a number of reasons. Having read and enjoyed No Bunnies, I Do Not Come to You by Chance, I did enjoy the angle through which the chapter provokes us to look at the figure of the scam baiter. Indeed, as I was reading the chapter, I couldn't help likening the scam baiter to the mob justice actors who justify violent vigilantism through a narrow ethical prism. Indeed, Yeku intentionally turns our gaze to the scam baiter as racist and sexist, making us see ways of resisting the image created through the websites meant to shame. Yeku's larger point is to negate stereotypical fixing that happens through such websites. By rereading the site of criminality in this way, we are also forced to reimagine the figure of the Afropolitan. So I'll just jump right into my questions then. And one question that pops to mind is this. To Yeku, what is your oppositional reading making possible, and how do you navigate ethical questions around defining agency in situations such as when we are asked to look at scam baiters as quote unquote evil and scammers as victims? Where is the agency for the scammers whose bodies are shamed online? I found that a little bit, so this is directly to one of your chapters. Second question is, what was your experience reading Black female bodies in these websites? This particularly because Black female bodies seem to signal something entirely different to Black male bodies, especially if one reads these bodies through the eroticized gaze. Beyond the image you refer to, what are the paratexts, or what are the afterlives or pre-lives of these texts? In decontextualizing the image of the trophy room, a lot of the questions arise for me, such as, what kinds of other discussions were taking place? And lastly, and this for me was important, and I think has already been signaled, what were the larger intentions of the chapter on anti-heroes for the rest of the book? Why was it important to introduce the anti-hero first before getting into other discussions? What needed undoing before engaging the subject of the Nigerian digital subject or cultural citizen? This is never really made apparent, and it's created a question for me, both in terms of acknowledging existing notions or representational cultures, as well as the desire, as you mentioned in this chapter, to disrupt these representations. I also wondered with the chapter on Nollywood, for instance, if you intentionally arranged your book to have the scammers chapter and Nollywood chapters ahead of the other chapters in the book. In fact, I wondered if these two chapters were particularly important in signaling ways in which Nigeria enters and circulates in global discourse. The question of structure for me is also important because it indicates a method for doing digital studies that may not always be very clear-cut. Digital studies that center on culture often tend to be structured around issues of thematic significance, but more and more, questions of method and methodology become crucial in terms of knowledge building and discipline building, if this makes sense. Indeed, I was interested in the thought process that was involved in deciding to expand on your meaning and thoughts on popular culture academic debates within this chapter. A more general question for me has to do with the multiple genres and texts that you congregate in the book. What kinds of challenges did this exercise spring up for you in terms of answering the ultimate question brought out through your formulation of cultural netizen? In other words, did you find it a challenge speaking to the different kinds of texts, viral texts, scammers, Afropolitan, and so on? And the last point that I'm going to make, because I'm trying to rush through this, is I think, just to reiterate the point I'm making here, is in what ways do you see your book contributing to methodological issues in the field of popular culture, specifically in the arena of digital performance? Is it doing this? If so, how? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dina. You made it inside of your time, which is quite an accomplishment. I want to encourage the panelists to post short versions of their questions so that the listeners can see the questions, because it's going by pretty fast. So if you could just post whenever you get a chance, post your questions to the entire group, that would be great. let's move on now to our next presenter, who is Shola Olorunimi, and he's going to go now, please.
Well, good afternoon, afternoon out there, I hope. I really am glad to be here today. Thanks for the honor, the organizers and the author. But let me first say congratulations to the prospective readers and the audience here today, the panelists, and thirdly, to the author. I say this partly because a work of performance, no matter how much of it is in the digital space, derives its ultimate meaning from some kind of audience reaction, which includes all of us here today, and the ultimate audience out there in the streets. Now, I'll like to quickly say and move on to my work. My daughter is no longer at home and she's serving the country. So I am not a digital native. I am a latter arrival. So if anything goes wrong and you don't see me again, be assured that I will read nonetheless. And don't be worried if I don't seem perturbed. Well, the work, cultural netizenship, social media, and popular culture and performance in Nigeria, by its very title, we can anticipate an encyclopedic instrument on the use of the social media. This book has come to explicate the new cultural order of the internet and its social media dimension, where we now often live and relive life, even making our livelihood. The author, from the very beginning to the end, 292-page work, including the preliminary pages, clearly dwells on the new culture of ethnography, using Nigeria as a case study, as it were. Having studied the language and style of Yeku, it is obvious that he's quite conscious of the urgency for clarity, such that he has ensured a language that is both comely and accessible to scholars and the broad intellectual public. And this is strange, but most welcome. Please don't laugh, because even without going ethnographic on the author, his earlier writings suggest a scholar who had beaten enough of the creative side of Soyinka's intellectual movements. And there are the periodic and timely usage of pictures to create imageries and symbolisms. All of these make the book more meaningful and interesting to read. This is, however, not to suggest that you are going into a textual engagement without having to pause, rethink, and reflect on a groundswell of emerging lexicons, tons of phrases, and an emerging puzzle of the languaging of futures. And isn't just this apt that the author chose to dedicate the book to two members of the Omo and not Ara futures. I'll explain that. The two members of these futures are Iwa Lewa, and Ewa Oluwa, his two daughters. Omo, or indigenes, are the early arrivals of futures. In a book written by a settler, latter arrival, and Ara features, which is Yeku himself, engaging our contemporary futures. Now, let me just clearly say, moving on to the chapter outline, that we have out there 6 clear chapters and the epilogue and the reference section. And with the above structure, one understands a glance of the magnitude of Yeku's effort as a scholar. Let me now take the structure piece by piece. But with this kind of time frame that I do have, I'll jump, but I'm glad to present this paper for a larger outlet whenever we're set for this. Now, I start out by saying that the chapter, which is the first one, in a unique way discusses the digital anxiety of Nigerian netizens. It strongly believes that the Nigerian netizens are guided by culture in their ways of interaction on the net. The first one is tempted to ask is, what does scam-baiting mean? I already warned that there are lexicons that will be fresh and sometimes puzzling. Yeku answers the question, while cultural netizenship is rooted in the interaction of the popular culture of the social media. Yeah, I analyze scam-baiting, a practice of shaming foreign scammers in digital vigilante communities, mostly in Western locations, and the website that mark their complicity in the punitive politics of Black masculine bodies. To bring this concept to the Nigerian space, Yeku relies on Adaobi Obami's novel, I Do Not Come to You by Chance, and whose theme is on Nigerian scammers usually referred to as 419 scammer. Yeku states that scamming is global. It gives plethora of examples with citations, but is more interested in Nigerian culture of scamming. Now, Yeku moves on, jumping, that the Nollywood replicates what is shared on the internet on cultural beliefs and systems. When one sees some Nollywood home videos, one cannot but agree with Yeku's submissions that Nollywood has become a center of memification, as it were. Yeku argues, social media as an inherently performative space sometimes makes the most somber discussion vulnerable to the disruption of internet memes. Or, in recent times, vintage Nollywood images that serve as some of the most viral idioms of cultural netizenship. As the meme culture in Nigeria is imbricated with Nollywood, the new texts produced transform, complicate, and even override the original meanings of these Nollywood classics, with significant political, epistemic, and ethical consequences arising, he says. Yeku is much concerned that the Nollywood will have become an agency that highlights a lot more than meets the ordinary eye. Now, I move into self-spectrality and the performance of the political self. Now, here, Yeku takes ample time to examine selfies and self-portraits as performative self-presentations in the thoughts of cultural netizens. So, pictures play a role here. But I have 2 questions here. One is that, and leading up from the earlier chapter to this 3rd chapter, now, I was wondering if the performativity of the written, and I by this I do not mean just the ethnographic. but also the act of the typographic space itself and the entire habit of the writing tradition transferred to the digital space. I was really hoping that this could have been engaged a little more. Did I miss out something? Now, moving on quickly, visualizing resistance and performance and performing with a visual. Now we move into the zone of the cartoon, which is the focus of this chapter. And Etim Basi Asukos what comes to play here. This is interesting because many do not know the semiotic significance of cartoon. A lot of people believe that cartoon could be for other ends than the way he argues here. But aside, am I still on?
Yes.
Oh, great,
yes,
thanks.
But we have to wrap up now. I think you're out of time, but you're still on.
Okay, fine. I could do that in a minute and a half. Is that okay? Or I should just...
A minute, yeah.
A minute, okay.
Yes.
There is also the viral and Instagram comedy in the state of pandemic, which I'm glad to speak about during the Q&A. And then, of course, the cultural netizenship and the practice of recovery. In the conclusion, I express gratitude to the author. I promise him a lot of feedback. Hopefully comfortable, but I can't promise. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We're going to move straight on to Professor Sabina Upuku Agemang, and it's so wonderful to see you on, and I know you have lots of thoughts. So I will do the same. I will let you know when you have 1 more minute, and I will also let you know when your time is up. So go ahead.
Thank you very much, and good evening to all of you, and congratulations to Professor James Yeku for this groundbreaking work. I've talked about it in an earlier book panel, and this is an amended version of that talk, but it's wonderful work. Chimamanda Adichie's last novel, Americana, includes a very short scene where the auntie of the protagonist, who has moved from Nigeria to America, has a relationship with Bartholomew. And Bartholomew is a Nigerian man who has been domiciled in America for decades. And in the novel, once you are African and you stay abroad for a long time, you get a certain level of credibility. So while Bartholomew is a generally terrible person, the narrator tells us that he and other America-based Nigerians maintain their connection with Nigeria by engaging in online arguments and by being simultaneously nostalgic and dismissive of their country. Adichie tells us that absence makes the heart grow fonder. And these Nigerians have a complex relationship with their country that is passed through the internet. And Bartholomew and his friends are a parody of the Nigerian netizen, whom Yeku revolves his work around. The cultural netizen is not just based on a redeployment of others. The person is also based on an international angle that questions what it means to be Nigerian. Overly dwelling on this transnational aspect of the internet is a potential trap that Yeku avoids by acknowledging that place has a is contested online. So diaspora and home have always had a complex relationship for Africans who started increased voluntary travel abroad from the middle of the 20th century and increased even more during the decades of military interventions and IMF-backed hardships. So in the age of the Afropolitan, home is a contested issue that Yeku is very interested in unpacking as he looks at the engagement of the internet by Nigerians, both in Nigeria and outside of Nigeria. And Yeku tells us early on how he sat behind his electronic devices to witness the ways in which social media connected with political activism in North Africa. And this, for him, was related in a sort of oblique way to how Nigerians later on became inspired by those events, and they began to gradually but consistently use the internet for political means. And I'll return to this at the end of this presentation. In a sense, anyone with access to the internet has the potential to contribute to historical moments by being online, yet not all content is worth looking at. Yeku is highly aware of how different the various social media platforms are in terms of engagement, audience, and effects, and how our understanding of their different natures influences how we use them. So, for example, YouTube is very different from TikTok, very different from Instagram, very different from Facebook, very different from Twitter. And he could have easily picked just one of these mediums and used them to look at his work, but he takes all of them and is still very clear about the fact that even though they are all social media, they have their own unique identities, which require specific and respective types of engagement. He points out on page 79 that more creative individuals can now directly engage with culture and hegemonic power, deploying different technologies to create their stories and assert their voices. The content creator, in other words, takes advantage of social media to intervene in the public space in ways that was not as possible as in the past. So the content creator, in a sense, functions similarly to the oral artist in terms of performance and audience relationships, which makes me wonder, for instance, how do the social media users implicitly draw upon archives that previously connected and curated public discourse? Yeku says, I take seriously the digitally convivial and examine how various forms of visual popular culture produced and distributed on social media serve as the performative idiom that interpolates as cultural netizens, those who routinely integrate memes and artistic images of popular culture into performances and narratives of self on the internet. These sentences are quite emblematic of Yeku's writing, and there's a lot to unpack in any of these kinds of very, very important takes on something that we all do and use, but haven't necessarily thought through as thoroughly as he has. In a sense, his work functions as a ready and immediate archive of contemporary social media practices that animate space both inside and outside Nigeria. And Nigeria has a vibrant population in different countries that add to the local fabric in diverse ways. My own familiarity with Ghana allows me to question some of the things that, or some of the issues that Yeku raises, because he positions his work in an African context, right? So, for example, the question of class. He says that, so the internet is not exclusive to rich or middle class users, and Yeku points out that it is reductionist to imagine internet engagement as class due to the presence of other social factors, which is very important because a lot of times the internet in Africa is always framed through a lens of class, and that leads to these reductionist problems that he wants us to take out. But there is a related question there which Yeku raises in terms of the subaltern. So he identifies two different groups of subalterns, and the first one, for me, there's a bit of interest there. And he says that the first group does not have access to the internet, so they are muted online. But my question is, does it matter, especially in some contexts where, like these people, do they need to involve internet in their lives? There's research in the Upper East of Ghana that shows how the mobile phone radically altered notions of respect and communication among a group of people who are typically used to engaging in person. So the phone sort of it forced them to rethink basic ways of being and doing that they were used to, you know? So then the question is it really development if we increase access if we increase internet access to people who don't really care about using the internet, for instance? And should it matter, and should we call them subalterns because they don't have the internet? Like, is it a lack of privilege for them if we thought about it from their point of view? Okay, so I have just a minute more, so I'll jump down a bit. I'll just say, though, that I agree with Adejumobi, whom Yeku cites. He says that we should be careful. She says that we should be careful about inferring the powerlessness of the subjugated and mutinous at the margins. And in any case, which ordinary citizens actually have tangible power anyway? Is it those on Instagram or TikTok whose videos go viral only to disappear afterward? Is it those on Facebook who get many likes when they respond harshly to a public or to political figure on Facebook or Twitter? After all, as Yeku notes, the Jonathans eat the cake as they are abused. As a literary scholar, I'm also interested in the literariness of the work. I'm just about to wrap up. So Yeku positions the selfies, memes, posts, and comments as narratives. So I just wonder about the relationship between performance and narrative in those contexts. And I'll just end here with a question that was raised by one of the other panelists, which is the ethics of reading popular culture online. Okay, reading these different social media movements, as Yeku does, leads to a question of selection and suppression. And that is one of the questions I have for James. What informs your choices, right? And what happens to those that are left out? If we are going to take your book as a definitive understanding of social media in Nigeria, which I think we should, because it's a very important book, what about those other movements that were taken out? You seem very interested in the quotidian, but then you take spectacular events and use those to frame your work. So do we have anything, or should we be thinking about the everyday, as you seem to be interested in, but then you don't really talk about as much as the more sort of, for lack of a better word, spectacular moments that frame or that form the data for your work? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pavina. We're going to ask our Professor Yeku to respond now in the next 15 minutes or so. And I encourage people who are listening, if they can access the chat to start putting their questions into there. But first, we'll allow our author to respond to these very insightful questions and observations, questions of class, questions of digital vulnerability, questions of networks objectivity. There's a lot for you to chew on, so I hope you decide what you want to tackle now before we throw it open to others.
Yeah, thanks so much, Rhonda. Indeed, there's much that one can sit with from all of these very amazing responses. And I just must begin by, again, thanking all of you for doing this. It's a great honor to listen to you talk about my work. I listened to Professor Lauren Yomi, and I thought about my teacher way back in grad school in Ibadan, paying my tuition fee and ensuring that I had money to eat almost every week. And, so, I mean, for me, the greatest compliment somebody can pay you is when your teacher, talks about your work with such passion and insights. And of course, thanks to Dotun. Dotun read a chapter of this work. When you have had a rejection from a previous press and you're scrambling to, get your thoughts together, and you're like, so what are my friends? You want to draw from your community, from your own networks, whether peer networks or not. Anyway, I found Dotun and I was like, would you like to read this? And then Dotun just basically, brought some vivaciousness to this book all over again. And I can but just thank you. The center with Shola Denekon, we read a couple of chapters also. And I'm just so glad that everybody here, Kwabena also, and then those very insightful words from Dina. The chair of today's event, Rhonda, has been, this massive figure behind all of us claiming to work on Digital Africa, just encouraging us. And I just want to say thank you, Rhonda. This, if I had chosen to dedicate a book to you, it would have been worth it. So, anyway, to get to some of the points raised, I can't really cover all of these very provocative and important issues you raise. But I think one major question that has come out, I think Dina mentioned this and Dotun did also, is the question of the very first chapter and what it does in terms of structurally advancing the argument of the work. And what I would say to that is just to, plead that people look at the introductory chapter again and see my, justification for including the scam baiting chapter in the book. So what I wanted to do was to look at cultural netizenship as a productive site of popular engagement on the digital, right? But before doing that, I needed to say, this is important because of this. It's important to think of cultural netizenship as generative because there is a sense of Nigerian digital subjectivities that are framed in terms of the stereotypic, and I needed to deconstruct that. So in a lot of ways, therefore, you could see chapter 1 as the premise for the other chapters that follow. If you talk to anybody out there about Nigerian digital subject anywhere in the world, especially in the global north, you think immediately of the 419 scammer, you think immediately of the Nigerian prince, right? Anybody who, internet legends all over the world foreground the figure of the Nigerian prince. So my intention was to engage with this figure and to locate that figure in the context of current contemporary digital cultures more generally, just to say, here's this figure that is usually bandied around as the ideal image of the Nigerian digital subject. Now, having done that, we need to show that, but this is exactly what we as Nigerians, we're productive people who use popular culture for forms of politicking on Facebook, TikTok, and in all of those spaces. So that was what I had in mind with chapter 1. But I agree with you, Dina, with you, that I could have been clearer and I could have taken that argument along. As a matter of fact, probably restated it in the epilogue. But again, that was the reasoning behind that, and that's my first lesson for a second book: make your argument as possible and take it along all through. I think Professor Laramie's question is important. Oh no, there's no second book. Then I'm just saying, I mean, when you begin to think about these things, right? But Professor Laramie asked this question about the relationship between performance and narrative. And I think it's really important, right? In terms of what a writing culture is and how it is translated into an online environment, which Kwabena also very importantly touches upon. My response to that is just to think in terms of the archive I am working with, right? And how when Shola Adeneko has already produced an important manuscript on digital literatures, African literature in a digital age, I thought it was not necessary to reinvent the wheel. The literary dimensions of this archive are already well congealed already in Adeneko's work. So I wasn't really interested in the question of the literary, of the narrative, right, as much as I was interested in the question of the performative, of the popular. So in many ways, my work built upon the very important and foundational work of Adeneko to say, okay, he has this important work from the perspective of literature. Therefore, let's look at other, the visual dimensions of things. So why my work focuses on visual media, in a lot of ways, the work was already done by Adeneko, and again, it's important to thank him for doing that, making sure that the rest of us can take that kind of work forward. And Kwabena, I don't agree with you. I'm sorry, this book cannot be the definitive book on social media. I think lots and lots of people will, take this argument in other directions and hopefully, come up with something more stimulating than what Adeneko has done and what I've managed to do. What is important is that people like Adeneko and Rhonda and you guys have given us something to build upon, and hopefully nobody does something definitive. We keep, challenging one another. We keep generating new insights. We keep the uncertain, in place. So the productive continues to emerge. But again, I wish I could cover all of this, the questions raised. I just want to say how grateful I am to be able to listen to everybody talk. Did not mention something about taking the unserious seriously. And, immediately you think about what Lauren Balland calls the counter-politics of a silly image. What does it mean to think about the selfie as something that is, that is a test of leisure and pleasure, and then all of a sudden it becomes reconfigured as a test of politics? Those kind of questions are important for me, just thinking about quotidian forms of everyday digital communication and how internet memes, GIFs, and Nollywood-derived, visual forms become foundational to the kind of arguments I believe this book is making. Multiple textualities. I think this was again from Dina. How the book contributes to popular culture. I mean, I was listening to the panel on Nollywood the other day, and Onokome Okome talked about the historiography of Nollywood, how we need to come up with the making of the scholarship of Nollywood, right? And how Nollywood studies is provoking new directions. And one of the things I thought I would hear would be Nollywood's recent imbrications with social media, and that did not necessarily come up, right? Especially with digital archives, with digitality more broadly. I imagine that a book like this can participate in that kind of conversation when eventually these established scholars begin to take more seriously the place of the digital, because I think that's the future. And in many ways, Hollywood itself, like Onokome argued, is very, very much invested in the digital. The digital has a lot in the development of Nollywood. And in terms of audience reception, what audiences are doing with Nollywood films, in terms of remixing, repurposing, how Nollywood becomes retranslated into, into spaces that are not even Nigerian or African, right? Mm-hmm. How audiences globally using the digital. I think these are the kind of questions I believe this work on popular culture and digital performances can invigorate. I'm interested in how people who have no connections to Nollywood can use Nollywood because of social media, those kind of interventions that I think are really very important. Just to wrap up, the question of the subaltern, Kwabena, is important, and thanks for raising that. I was interested in the digital subaltern, this person without internet access. But of course, you're right, most of the time this person can have a mobile phone. But my point is not to conflict having the ownership of the mobile phone with internet connectivity, because there's this sense in which we almost begin to over-determine the form of the mobile phone, right? So we talk about, at this moment, I remember writing a response to one of the readers of the earlier stage of the manuscript saying, digital connectivities and subjectivities on the continent today have gone beyond the stage of the mobile phone, to be honest. People are doing much more sophisticated thing. Asking us to keep fixating on the development of the mobile phone takes us to the past, right? So my argument is that, yes, the mobile phone continues to be very important in many places, but at the moment, people are doing, as a matter of fact, people are making mobile phones on the continent. We should be interested in other, scholarly possibilities the mobile phone generates. And I think one of them at the level of content, at the level of the discursive, will probably be new forms of textualities, new forms of, relations and practices we have online because of internet-enabled mobile phone. So, Kwabena, you're right. The non-digital subaltern, you have many of them there, but I was also interested in another class of the digital subaltern, people who have no access to economic and state power, but you will still consider them as some kind of subaltern because of the way they use the digital to rework their marginality and their place in the social peripheries, Anyway, scam bait in oppositional readings. Did you ask for the agency of the scam bait or the agency of the scammer? Which of them? I wasn't so sure I got that. Was it?
I actually was very interested in the agency of the scammer. Because you mentioned it, the person who's the scammer,
yeah. I thought that was what the question was about, but I thought I had the agency of the scam beta, because the scam beta is this digital vigilantist guy who is interested in basically ethically policing the agency of the scammer, the supposed scammer. And I think the chapter in a lot of ways responds to the agency of the scammer in terms of just, showing how his agency becomes undermined and undercut by these photographic exhibitions on the one hand. And then, it's a very difficult chapter, or a difficult subject to write about. How do you speak for criminals? How do you speak for scammers? Because these guys are scammers, to be honest. Yeah. My intervention is in terms of their representation online and scam baiting archives and trophy rooms. But I mustn't forget the fact that I am not interested in the glorification of crime. So it's an important question. Yeah. How do you speak about digital justice for people we love to hate or people who want to steal our money, right? On the one hand, I'm interested in their humanity, because even criminals, people in prison, deserve their dignity. How do you humanize people for whom agency becomes problematic, So I hear you, it's something to think about, especially, again, just thinking about the female bodies the female, because there are female scammers in representation of female scammers in these archives also. And I thought it was important to focus on them too. But the most dominant images are those of males. And the scam baiting archives offer us a lot to think about. I see Dr. wants to say something. So I'll just wrap up by saying thank you to everybody. I think this conversation can continue in various ways later, and I'll continue to reflect on these issues all of you have raised. But again, thanks to Shola Adenekan for the groundbreaking work he did some years ago, and how a lot of us are given the opportunity to build on it.
Thank you so much. This is so important and interesting. I was thinking of the Abu Ghraib images that came out during the Iraq War that spectacularized the bodies of Iraqi prisoners, and how similar. That's what I thought of when I did go to the scam baiting sites and see what they would do. So there's a connection I want to make. Shola has a question for you, and I'm going to, I suppose I can read it very quickly unless you have read it. Let's go with Shola's question. Your book makes important and cogent observations of the 419 scammers. It signposts us to the many facets of digital neoliberalness. It also points us to the way in which racial hegemony is reified through the actions of scam baiters, in which some Westerners become digital mobs. And he talks about your examples. I know that in his lyrics, including I'm a Yahoo boy, Marley may not have strongly disavowed 419 scams. He has always denied being a 419 scammer. Do you think you're a dispassionate observer regarding Naira Marley?
It's possible. It's possible. And I know
I'm asking as a Malian.
You're asking as a Malian. I'm probably, well, in a lot of ways, we're all Naira Marley, to be honest. We all have that, that Malian disruptive streak in us. And it's possible, right? I was just basically interested in using Naira Marley to ground the recent re-emergence of 419 discourses in Nigerian popular cultures. And, but you're right. I could be more critical of, my assumptions about Naira Marley. Doctor, you had a question?
I did, and I was going to let it go until we circled back to Marley, Naira Marley. So the question for me, I think, is, a moment ago, you shared that you weren't interested in glorifying crime, but I think you make a nuanced argument that you don't quite pursue in the chapter, which is that the exhibition of these Nigerian Black male bodies, and women also featured in this, but not in the same kind of eroticized way as Black men. Some Black men are. But I think the argument that you make, which you don't quite tease out, is that it's not always clear that the crime has occurred.
Yeah.
Right. So it's the slipperiness of that. It's not always clear. So what's actually happening is the criminalization of the body and not the establishment of a crime, right? And I think that takes us into and then that gets us into a more clearer space of how do we recover and speak about the humanity of the ostensible criminal.
Yeah, that's really important. But I think Dina is also trying to say something. I'll listen to you guys. Okay, but this is very important, right? And thanks for mentioning my reference to that in the book. These guys, well, again, to use the tropes of humor, rumor, like to draw from, Grace Michela's work, which Dina is pointing us to. There's this rumor, the assumption that everybody who is scam baited is actually a criminal, right? So the scam baiting community operates on the assumption that if you send out a letter to a white dude or somebody in the global north to try to get their money, you've probably done it before. But of course, that doesn't hold water in a court of law. I assume. My brother is a lawyer, he can correct me if I'm wrong. But I assume that argument is not true. But again, there's that remote dimension, which again foregrounds the importance of rumors and those kind of narratives in relation to the circulation of popular culture forms. And to go back to Naira Marley, it's this idea that implicates Naira Marley, right? The idea that the stories and narratives around him online, flow, they also emanate from that context of rumor. And that was what probably just gave me the guts to implicate him in the sense of, the 419 crime. His own stunt. So as I don't have a lot of literary material in the book, but I do, use literary forms here and there. The chapter on scam baiting using Omar Bani's novel. But when I do read certain, certain content, I draw from literary studies. So when I'm reading Naira Marley's Amai Yahoo Boys lyrics, his lyrics offer me, the resources to actually hang him, if that makes sense. Because his lyrics give me the sense that he's asking rhetorically if he's a criminal subject. So based on what his test is, his own test offer, my argument about him, belonging to that word was muted. But again, it's something to think about and understand in terms of how rumor operates and circulates online.
Yeah, I'm thinking too of Jenna Burrell's book on Ghanaian users of online texts and how she talks about the ways in which these stereotypes around the scammers intervene to sort of frame anything that these innocent users, if you can call them that, and there's that as well.
Researcher. I would say that use certain images and certain narratives online for me was basically contingent on their public availability. I wasn't really interested in text and images that were curated in a certain way that debate, any participation of the public. And since I was working with Instagram, skits, cartoons, most of these tests were out there. In fact, the producers of these skits, these cultural forms, want you to use them. They want you to consume them. They want you to circulate them. So at the level of ethics, I wasn't interested in perhaps, concealing identities and names of people. Those are ethical, things.
This is in the public domain, yeah.
Yeah, they're in the public domain. You think about this kind of ethical concerns when you're dealing with certain kinds of material, perhaps maybe violence against women or the LGBTQ community. But with this kind of material, it's out there. But beyond the question of the public domain is the question of the question of virality. To use and consume these images is to contribute to the viral possibilities of these artists, right? How does Mr. Macaroni become a brand? And this goes back to my brother's question. How does Mr. Macaroni become a brand? What's the economic, implication of, performing oral poetics, for instance, in your comedy skit? You make money when you have a lot of followers. So followership is actually what determines what people now call social media, influence. I think Adunadela can call them and entrepreneurs of thought or opinions in a book. How these guys are basically dependent on followership. So as a researcher, I follow these guys to consume their work and then to write about their work. But at the same time, I'm also contributing to the economic dimensions of their craft, right? And I think that is really important, especially when you think about what it means to write about a medium in which you are also very much invested.
I'll just jump in. I was fascinated by this one illustration. I think it was of Mike Asukwo, where you include a screenshot of his cartoon. And then we see the number of likes, we see the number of shares, And we also see that you had liked it. So the first person that likes it is you, right? And I wondered if that was an intentional choice to signal the ways in which you as an author belong, insinuating yourself as a prosumer, as a producer and a consumer within this community.
As a member of the community. I think it was one way to signal a kind of proto-ethnographic approach I have in the book. It's not necessarily ethnography in terms of I was interested in some form of digital ethnography. I had interviews here and there with people, but the interviews did not even find, their way into the book. I used them in some other articles. Grace Musola's new work on popular culture. I have a work on Officer Woos, and I actually had this interview with the guy. I have another chapter in Polugo's work. I had an interview with another comedian. But for this particular work, I was just basically interested in signaling my own affiliations in these networks through, liking this post and capturing my own life. Because really, we're all kind of embedded in these digital networks, whether as a researcher or as consumers or even producers of knowledge, right? And the moment we see these forms and these so-called popular voices that circulate online as epistemic bodies and voices, it's easy to ingratiate ourselves into their works and find whatever they offer really productive for meaning making.
Yeah, this for me is the most the most problematic and intriguing thing about the online situation. You're almost never talking about the individual artist. You're talking about the act of circulation becomes the object of study, and that creates all kinds of new problems, because the act of circulation itself is not a subject, and yet it is the thing that carries the agency and makes things, keeps things moving. The idea, the most significant thing is the thing that is most liked. It has nothing to do with whether it's accurate, as we have seen in the US, or whether it's or whether it distorts or doesn't distort. Its power exists through its power to draw people in, and I think that's what I meant in my introductory remarks to your book, that's one of the things that you're really beginning to make us think about. How do you even find a sort of methodology and a critical language to address that? I see you mentioned Dean. She does a good job of it, I think, in some of her work. But I don't know if you want to say anything about anything more about that from the perspective of methodology.
No. I didn't quite get the last end of the question, Rhonda.
I was saying that how do we come up with a language, a critical language, to talk about circulation, the currency of circulation, as the object of study, as opposed to the person who's being talked about. There's a distinction. I'm thinking again of work on Grace Musila and that sort of thing. It's not so much whether they're right or wrong or good or bad, but this power that the act of circulation itself is bringing into the foreground is very difficult to talk about.
Yeah, because I think, Ron, that it's about the nature of the medium as a network space, right? And meaning becomes, possible not in isolation, as it were, right? But in terms of the relationship between forms and images. So what Deleuze would call an assemblage, right? An assemblage of bodies, of ideas, of actors, and different forms make meaning possible. So to really understand the production of meaning in this cultural environment, you're not just focused on a single individual. I understand Mr. Macaroni as an Instagram comedian in relation to many other other people in the networks. Let me use this example. When people talk about this new genre of popular comedy on social media, the focus is on this freaky guy, this Mr. Macaroni as a person. My work calls attention to that kind of reading, which is important. Focus on individuals rather than just the networks of circulation. But at the same time, I think it's important to go beyond Mr. Macaroni and look at the other factors that make his work possible. So there's this Adam Vicious, what's his name? Adam Victor, right? Anybody who knows Nigerian comedy will know Adam Victor Vicious. it's like the guy that produces for all of the Instagram comedians, whether it's Officer Woods, whether it's Tahoma. I think that everybody was using that particular guy. So I asked myself what it would be to think about Instagram comedy in terms of this unifying, figure, right? So it's possible to talk about both the unitary, but at the same time, it's probably more productive to think about this in terms of the networked economy that produces all of this.
Yeah. Well, we still have time, so I don't know who else has questions they want to ask. I'm looking through my chat here to see what else there is. Perhaps you can talk a little bit about the chapter that I have not yet read at the very end that comes back to that image of the pandemic and the idea of the virality of Instagram comedy. This is where you're going now, I know, in your conversation. But in the opening, you talked about you opened with those figures of the two, Ebola and Corona, and how they were being talked about. And maybe you want to say a little bit more about that, about the kind of critique that is coming out in this moment of resistance in Nigeria, as you see it.
I think I was just interested in that chapter in plugging into an ongoing situation, the pandemic.
Yes.
Reflect on, again, just to think about the contemporaneity of popular culture forms, how popular culture speaks to temporalities, whether past or present. And it was important for me to call attention in that chapter to the works of Ikorodu boys. And Ikorodu boys are these very young boys in urban Lagos, and their ability to repurpose existing works of popular culture, whether it's from Nollywood or Hollywood, but more importantly, how they were also, basically deconstructing narratives from the state media, right? Whether during the elections or after the elections. So the chapter basically for me was my attempt to understand the nature of virality using the works of these children comedy groups. So I was interested in two things. Why do things go viral, and what are the conditions that make things go viral in Nigerian social media? But to do that, I thought it would be interesting to look at these young boys who use everyday household items as technologies of cultural production. What does it mean to use what's the Cuban artists Ernesto Nazo would call technologies of disobedience? What does it mean to use technologies disobediently, such that a spoon, I have a spoon here, I hope you guys don't mind me showing it, a spoon can become say a microphone? What does that mean? Such that you use also technologies in disobedient ways just to produce a digital skit, right? How does that affect the possibility of going viral? How does that affect forms of reader identification online? And as a matter of fact, how does that affect what I think Abiola really called forms of oral immediacy? How does that, the immediacy of the digital space on the one hand, but also the immediacy of, of everyday life, right? Enacted at the material level this time around through the technologies of production. So that was my interest in the chapter, trying to map and track forms of virality, how things go viral, and how the skits of these children would repurpose and remix, works from politics, from Hollywood, from Nollywood, make all of those legible. The pandemic was just happening around the same time I was writing this. But again, it produced, this very important backdrop for the kind of narratives, the different cultural producers were also, responding to, whether it was Mike Asuko or those producing using Nollywood to interpret the pandemic moments, right? Or even answers. I saw a couple of memes that were responding to answers, but these memes were drawn from 90s Nollywood movies. What does that mean? How does the digital make that possible? How do new, generation of Nollywood consumers draw from old Nollywood to interpret the pandemic, to interpret answers, and to advance its narratives? I think that those are really fascinating questions that I hope a lot of people will take in other directions.
Do you have any predictions then for where things are going to go next? In my own work, I've I used to say, oh, the digital decade, 2007 to 2017. And I would note the way in which certain things began to change as the government began to be better at surveillance, which we haven't really talked about, and things like that. And who could have predicted, you know, the effect on the digital landscape of Corona, that, you know, that we would be sitting here on Zoom, and Zoom as a media would now completely redefine what we think of how things are going. So do you have any sense either of where the scholarship is going to go in this direction, or where the developments that you have seen coming up, especially in these youth people, are likely to take us in the future? And I know that these are pure speculations, and we will meet again next year and say, gosh, we could not have predicted that. But do you care to speculate?
Well, I think somebody mentioned the question of, I'm looking for my socket. My laptop will just probably go off. Anyway.
Yeah.
Someone mentioned the question of state surveillance, and I think it was Dr. Wood did that. A lot of people are more critical of the state's, you know, involvement in the online environment. I think it's already happening, but more importantly, what does it mean for us to consume or to produce and consume narratives online within media ecologies produced and created by people in other spaces? What does it mean to use global north social media platforms in the global south? I think these questions are becoming more, you know, important. From a critical internet studies perspective, what does it mean to be invested in the place of algorithmic systems in production of popular culture? Yeah, so people will be more I believe data extraction, the coloniality of data, issues of, you know, algorithmic violence might become more, as a matter of fact, they may not become important, but I think they should become more focalized for all of us as researchers. Sometimes I think we're too over celebratory of the affordances of the digital, of social media for the production of popular culture in Africa. We don't think enough about the extractive dimensions of these platforms and what it means for us to be using, you know, systems built by others. And I'm not saying we can do that. Cultural netizenship is actually based on the production of narratives based on, you know, the narratives and the images of others, right? Whether it's
always an appropriation. Yeah.
Always that kind of creative forms of appropriation that is not necessarily theft, more like creative repurposing and reusing. But in terms of using platforms we have not necessarily invested in, we have not built, I think we should be more critical of what it means in terms of the politics of data and the politics of data extraction.
And that's a question for you as well from Nathan. By the way, please go back to Nathan regarding publishing your review of Professor Yeku's book with Jala. So that's a question here for you. Can you see it in chat from Nathan?
And there's another question in the Q&A.
Yes, from Aduni, from Professor Adilakon as well.
Yes. So let's do Nathan's question first, and then we'll do the one in the chat.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nathan. I think that's an important question. And one of the things I found most enjoyable in the process of writing was just, you know, the pleasure of being online, the pleasure of just being immersed in the productive locations of these narratives I'm engaging with. I probably spent more time in the last 5 or 6 years just watching Instagram skits, following selfies. Again, doing some of this, you know, this kind of research that calls you to contemplate and take seriously the role of the unserious. I was just wasting time online as far as I'm concerned. There's this sense that those of us who do online research are just fooling around. What does it mean to do unserious research, something that's silly? So for me, thinking about all of that, and, you know, somebody would ask me to, I remember back during my days back in grad school, you find more serious students confronting Foucault and Derrida and you are just chasing internet memes. And but I thought that was part of the pleasure, right? The pleasure of the tech, not just of the test, right? If that makes sense. So anyway,
yeah,
I thought that was really enjoyable. And but I also found enjoyable the feedback I got from people, especially the readers. I submitted the book at the press. There was a good report, another bad report. The good report was really very generative for me, and it made me think about the importance of peer review and how it can be a critical form of exchange that really enriches you. So for me, just growing through the process of exchanging views with the readers and the editors was really good. And did that process change your mind about? Yes, as a matter of fact, it did, because learning from others, people, for instance, the chapter on the mimification of Nollywood, that was not the title of the chapter. That was, I think I probably call it, I probably changed the title of that chapter 5 to 6 times, right? But when a reader report came in and, the reader was suggesting that this is exactly what you're doing, I had to, creatively steal that title from the reader report. This is good. This is exactly the point I'm making. How new Nollywood and old Nollywood, if you like, become an archive of cultural productions for new users. There's a generational argument in that chapter that I really find interesting too. And again, so I think, again, just enjoying the process of peer review and all the silly things one was doing with memes and all of those things really was pleasurable, and it helped me to reconceive some of my argument, right? Mm-hmm. Dato mentioned something before I go to Adelakun's point. Dato mentioned something about the uses of the digital in other more insidious ways. And I think that issues of trolling, for instance, because this is not all about, I forget why I mentioned this in the book. It's not all a celebration of digital labels that make popular culture forms possible, right? This is also about how cultural netizenships can sometimes, this is mentioned in the introduction, can also sometimes be about about the negative anxieties out there, right? It could be issues of racism, sexist circulations of myths. The question of digital blackface was something I mentioned, for instance, to justify that, how you find that some of the internet memes and GIFs out there, some of the most preponderant ones at the point, were mostly those of Black people. And this wasn't my argument. This was an argument somebody was making out of Georgia, I think. And I thought it was really a solid argument to think about how the uses of Black images and Black faces circulate online, right? Again, that ties to the question of the Black masculine body and archives to some extent.
Yeah. Do you see the one in the quick Q&A?
Yes. It's a very difficult question, Adonai. I wish I had the answer for that. How long do you think the new initiative is driven? I don't know. But the thing about popular culture, like everybody knows, is and Karen Baba has argued this very eloquently, the nature of their improvisation, right? How things are always, constantly in flux, things are always changing. And, with a medium such as a digital, it gets even more messy and chaotic, right? And, things are always prone to these, to forms of creative variations. But I would say that the chaotic and the messy are also part of the resources for the popular, right? They are part of the things that make popular culture possible. So while I don't have an answer for Adonai, I do think that as more people become, ingratiated into this digital culture of popular culture production, these digital performances you have out there, at a point, state surveillance will increase. Visibility, as Foucault has reminded us, as that panoptic tendency to constrain agency, but the place of co-optation is always there, and that's why you probably see in the book I try not to romanticize these platforms as much as possible. I need to shut up so Dr. Lauren can speak. I saw his hand up. That's my teacher, so I'll shut up before you guys throw me away.
Yeah.
Can I go on, ma'am, sir?
Yes, please go ahead. I think we'd love you to have the last word. It would be.
Oh, thanks. It's a short one. I just like if you have the space time to contemplate a little hazard some kind of prognostication which had been suggested earlier on what you've talked about it, but more on the content. I'm wondering if as recent examiners are stressing the increasing shift in the shift from the space of places to the shift to the space of flows. Now, what might that have? What implication might that have? In the fuller aspect of my review, I actually said that not just that it was good you were doing this, dedicating to your daughters, but that by the time they're old enough to read this work, you will have needed to revise it. You know, what might you be revising in 20 years, 15 years time concerning those kinds of shifts from places to flows?
Yeah, I think that's a good one, which again returns us to Rhonda's question about the focus on the person, or perhaps we might be thinking about network, right? So the medium is one that foregrounds the primacy of networks, but also one of of flows also. Just thinking about continuities and circulations, and the word I'm most invested in one of the chapters is the idea of the rhizome, right? How things are not necessarily connected online, but more like things emerging from out of disconnections to create some kind of assemblage. But more importantly, to the specifics of things. In the next 20 years, revising this work, I think the work might no longer be current in the next 1 or 2 years, as a matter of fact. Again, because of the platform, right? It seemed like I was in a hurry to produce a book, and Dotun probably remembers this. And the reason was because of the medium, the ideas I had gathered over 5 to 6 years. They were no longer, how do you make them legible? So for my daughters in the next 5 to 6 years, I think something more monstrous, creatively and aesthetically more monstrous than TikTok would have emerged, right? And they would have to grapple with those, right? So the platform is a gift that keeps giving, and I'm just excited that for at least the book to an extent is able to capture just a slice of what we have in the moment.
Yeah.
Rhonda, please, this is not a question. I just like to clarify that Professor Yeku